Hello, we have the pleasure of meeting Dyllis Braithwaite, who is a longtime Barrington resident and former owner of one of our pillar stores in Barrington, Finn's Fabric. So when we begin, where did you live as a child?
I lived in Pine Meadow, Connecticut, on a farm, and that was a great privilege.
When did you learn to sew?
Actually, I learned to sew watching my mother, but I also learned, I took home economics education at the University of Connecticut, and I was a home economics teacher.
Did you make your own clothes when you were in grade school, high school?
No.
No?
My mother could make something out of nothing, and she would stay up late nights making things for us to wear.
And you mentioned you majored in home ec at the university. How did this choice help you find employment?
Well, I had a creative niche in me, and I taught high school at the high school that I went to in Winston, Connecticut, the Gilbert School, after I graduated, and I taught there for 1 year.
And what did you do after that point?
Well, my husband was in the service. I met my husband at the University of Connecticut, and we were very involved in 4-H, and mostly recreational and square dancing and that sort of thing. And he was the president of 4-H, and I was the secretary, and we had lots of business to attend to. And we got to know each other very well and fell in love.
It's nice. How did you become acquainted, and later, or I should say, how did you come to live in the Barrington area?
Well, that's another story. After my husband was out of the service, he went to Columbia Law School in New York. And when he graduated, he was awarded a teaching fellowship in legal writing at Northwestern for 1 year.
Okay. And then you moved to the Barrington area, or did you live elsewhere in the Chicagoland area?
Well, at first we came to Evanston, and we were provided an apartment for 1 year while he was teaching at Northwestern, but then our family grew, and we moved to Wilmette, and our family grew, and we looked out in the Barrington area and found just the home we wanted.
How did you become acquainted and later purchase Finn's Fabrics in Barrington?
Mr. Finn had offices where my husband had his office up over the bank, which is all now McGonagall's. Had his office there, and he told my husband, "Oh, you won't be seeing me very much." And my husband one day said to him, "How come I'm seeing you so much?" "Oh, I'm having trouble with my manager." So my husband said, "Well, call my wife, she's looking for something to do." And I became Mr. Finn's manager and doubled his business and made it expensive to buy.
Now, where was Finn's located in Barrington?
North Cook Street, 113 North Cook Street.
And how long was the business, how long was Finn's Fabric in business for?
Well, I was in business there for 40 years.
It's a lot. And when did you become a manager at Finn's?
1970. Well, we bought it in 1972, and it was 3 years before that that I started being the manager. And I would buy the fabrics and change them. There was a lot of polyester, and I was a naturalist. I wanted natural fibers, silks and cottons and wools and mohairs and beautiful fabrics, and polyesters aren't really healthy to wear either.
How did Finn's Fabrics differ from today's popular fabric stores like Joann? Years back we had Hancock Fabrics.
Well, I bought all the fabric for the store, and I traveled to the West Coast, to San Francisco and Los Angeles and lots of other places where they were having fabric shows, and I selected the fabric from the different resources, and people would say to me, well, how did you find this? And I say, well, I know. The Lord gave me the ability to know what's beautiful, and people love what they see in my store, and I did displays that people would come in just to see it, get a lift of, and they would just come in for that, and I got to be known as the most unique collection of beautiful fabrics in the whole Chicago area, and some people said the country.
Country, okay. So you competed more or less with Marshall Fields, because I remember they had beautiful fabrics from all over the world.
Right, but I gave personal attention, one of a kind.
Now, did you sew those, the costumes for the models in your store, or did you wear the costumes?
I made them for myself, and I would decide what looked good on me, and then I'd make something of it, and then my customers would want the same thing. And we had a sew club at my store also that met every week, and I had to do demonstrations for them and inspire them because they paid money to attend the sew club. And so I have an extensive wardrobe, and people, no matter where I go, the grocery store, the symphony, to the bathroom, wherever, people say, oh, I love what you're wearing. And that's the name of my books. Oh, I love what you're wearing.
May I ask you, the costume you're wearing today for our presentation, is that part of the Finn's fabric? Did that come from the Finn's fabric?
Yes.
And did you design that?
I sold that, and this fabric right here, this print, is a decorator fabric, and I bought it from Cyrus Clark. He was a business in New York, and I got to know those people personally very well. And oh, I love this fabric, and they said, oh, we'll give it to you if you make something out of it. So this is what I created, and I wore this to my niece's wedding. She lived in Granville, Massachusetts, and we were in the Chicago area then, in Barrington. And we were just going for the weekend, and so this was my traveling outfit. And then I'm going to put the jacket on. This is a hand screen printed fabric that I bought in the Netherlands. We have a daughter, Nancy, that lives in the Netherlands, and I found this resource in Utrecht in a store, and I asked if I could purchase it, and he said, oh no, you can't purchase it. But then I had my daughter, who spoke Dutch beautifully, call him up, and he said yes, I could purchase it, and so I selected many of these hand screen printed fabrics that are absolutely gorgeous, and I have pieces, clothing that I wear a lot. And here I've picked up the color in the print with the trim that has a little gold in it that picks this gold up.
You mentioned you went to California, San Francisco, and Los Angeles to purchase some of your fabrics. Did you?
What's the city? San Diego, too. And one of my resources in New York was Arthur Zeiler Woolens. And Arthur introduced me to Joanne Stark, who had a shop in Torrance, California, because he realized that we had a lot in common. And it was Joanne Stark that urged me on to do a wearable art book. And she said, just hang your clothes around in your house and have somebody take pictures of them. And that's what I eventually did. And I had 3 marvelous photographers. My across the street neighbor for 50 years, Maxine Kress, was the first person that helped me with the photography. And then I asked Bob Lee, whom I met in my garden. I have to have a garden. I can't live without a vegetable garden. And I had a garden, and the weeds had gotten a little ahead, and Bob is so wonderful. He came over and rototilled my weeds so that I could plant my seeds and so forth. He noticed, and he's a marvelous person. He rides his bike for 3 reasons, and it earns money for cancer, ALS, and Let It Be Us. And he and his wife, Ann, are just wonderful people, and they've become dear, dear friends. And Maxine Kress is a dear friend. And Bob Lee, after we printed the first book, showed it to Susan McConnell, and she said, well, I want to be in the next book. So my second book, Susan was a photographer as well. So 3 wonderful photographers in my books. As you can see, they're top-notch, and I had them for my book, and they were just lovely.
Now, with the various art patterns you have, did you use like Vogue or
I don't make patterns. I used Vogue and some other kind of folkwear patterns and lots of different patterns. Izzy Miyake patterns and Koos van der Nacker. I was a little bit worried about modeling all the clothes in my wearable art books for your coffee table books. And I said that to Maxine Kress, and she said to me, Dyllis, you have to think of yourself as a movie star. So that's what I've been doing from now on, thinking of myself as a movie star.
You mentioned you went to California, San Francisco, and Los Angeles to purchase some of your fabrics.
What's the city? San Diego, too. And one of my resources in New York was Arthur Zeiler Woolens. And Arthur introduced me to Joanne Stark, who had a shop in Torrance, California, because he realized that we had a lot in common. And it was Joanne Stark that urged me on to do a wearable art book. And she said, just hang your clothes around in your house and have somebody take pictures of them. And that's what I eventually did. And I had 3 marvelous photographers. My across the street neighbor for 50 years, Maxine Kress, was the first person that helped me with the photography. And then I asked Bob Lee, whom I met in my garden. I have to have a garden. I can't live without a vegetable garden. And I had a garden, and the weeds had gotten a little ahead, and Bob is so wonderful. He came over and rototilled my weeds so that I could plant my seeds and so forth. He noticed, and he's a marvelous person. He rides his bike for 3 reasons, and it earns money for cancer, ALS, and Let It Be Us. And he and his wife, Ann, are just wonderful people, and they've become dear, dear friends. And Maxine Kress is a dear friend. And Bob Lee, after we printed the first book, showed it to Susan McConnell, and she said, well, I want to be in the next book. So my second book, Susan was a photographer as well. So 3 wonderful photographers in my books. As you can see, they're top-notch, and I had them for my book, and they were just lovely.
Now, with the various art patterns you have, did you use like Vogue or
I don't make patterns. I used Vogue and some other kind of folkwear patterns and lots of different patterns. Izzy Miyake patterns and Koos van der Nakker is a Dutch composer. I didn't say that quite right, but I took advantage. I didn't want to spend the time making patterns. I wanted to spend my time creating. And how do you create something? Wearable art. You fall in love with the fabric. That's the beginning. And of course, this was the fabric that I fell in love with. And then I found this blue that would be picked up in it, and then I picked up where'd my trim go, but anyway, here it is. Here it is, right here. There's a gold braid, and then there's another trim that I added to it to emphasize the different parts. And here I covered the buttons to pull the fabric another way. And
now, may I ask, what type of fabric is that with the print? Is that a cotton
it's
sateen?
a cotton sateen. You got it right. And it's meant for draperies. That's what they made it for. But I use lots of drapery fabrics for clothing.
And what is the blue, your jacket? What fabric is that now?
That's a silk, raw silk. And it's more loosely woven. The reason I said before that polyesters aren't healthy, they don't let your body breathe. You need natural fabrics to let your body breathe and be comfortable. And if it's hot weather, you're much cooler also.
Now, speaking of fabrics, you mentioned New York, California. Did you procure any of your fabrics and notions from Europe, like Italian, French fabrics?
Yes, I bought the one in Utrecht, the Netherlands. I bought fabric. But I also went to New Orleans. Wherever they'd have the fabric show, that's where I would go. And it would be held twice a year. And I'd always take my husband with me because I don't like to stay in hotels by myself. And it was a fun time, and people got to look forward to see what I was going to wear. And I became famous for my creativity all over the country.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned a couple people inspired you to have your book published featuring, now you selected your fall and winter collection,
Yeah.
and you have...
No, this was the first book. I'm going
Mhm.
to take it off of here.
Mhm.
This was the first book that we did, and Maxine Kress and Bob Lee were the photographers for that. And we organized, Maxine and I organized it. Here's a winter coat of mohair, and it's lined with velveteen, and I'm wearing a wool knit sweater dress that I made underneath it. And I have a cap that I wear with it. And here, I've used the same fabric to do a vest. And I've, well, now I can't think of the name of what I want. I am Dyllis Braithwaite. Lived in Barrington since 1956. And Barrington has been my home. And I lived in Finn's Fabrics for 40 years. That was my shop. And it gives me great pleasure to create wearable art here. But you can see how I've free motion embroidery, that's what it is. I'm 92 years old, so you can excuse me if I can't come up with the name and right at the beginning. But it's the scraps that were left over from making the coat, and you throw them in the washer and dryer to shrink them up. And this is just like I took it out of the dryer, but then I did free motion embroidery, and you take all the pressure off your presser foot and you put the fabric under it, and you can just move it like this in circles or back and forth, and you just let yourself go. You feel free, and that's what I've done to it to get this
It's a beautiful effect.
intricate design. And I've incorporated some other wool fabrics in it too, a green and a lighter green. This is I believe it's a Koos Vandenacker pattern, and I fell in love with this fabric right here. And what did I do with it? This is one side of it, and this is the other. You use it to the nth degree. And to do balance, this is the back side, and here's the back side, and then the sleeve are opposite. And then I picked up a black, and they have to be about the same weight to drape. And this has some gold, some silver in it. And here's another drapey fabric that I picked up to use in it. And this is a very comfortable dress, and it hides a multitude of sins too. And this is the same pattern that I've incorporated different fabrics of that blend with the zebra fabric, and this is an overall sort of flowered fabric. But they all blend together, and the Lord has given me the ability to know when they're beautiful. And how do I know? I get chills up and down my spine.
Looking back, what do you believe have been the happiest times in your life?
Well, there's so many happy times, being with people, being with family, being with friends, sharing my creativity, working in my garden. But I suppose one of the happiest was when I married my husband, but then this was in 1951, and he was stationed in, going to be shipped to Germany, and we'd just been married, and so he was in Germany for a year, and I was teaching high school at the Gilbert High School in Winston, Connecticut, where I also went to school. But then in May, Memorial Day, I boarded the Ile-de-France to go by ship to Le Havre, France, to meet my husband. And I spent the whole summer with him in Nuremberg in the Grand Hotel. And it was an experience, a little farm girl going off to Europe and learning how to drink champagne on the board ship. But my husband had saved up all his duties. He'd taken them for other people, so he met me at Le Havre, and he had a second-hand car that he'd bought, and for 2 weeks we traveled through Europe, and it was, of course, a very happy time. But I'm happy lots of places.
What do you believe are the major accomplishments in your life?
My creativity, my books, my wearable art, my books opened up a whole new world for my husband and me. We got to know Bob Lee, we got to know Susan McConnell and Maxine Kress. Susan is my dearest friend now. It opens up a world of people that I didn't know before, and our friends, because I'm 92, we're going to a funeral every other day, it seems, these days. But I was the first cultural event at the White House, and it's just exciting in our world.
And has the library played a role in your life, the Barrington Area Library?
Yes.
And so what way? I know I saw you and your husband dancing
Yes.
to a waltz at Second Fridays.
We've come to the Second Fridays, and I have difficulty reading now, and you've helped me with choosing movies and books and things like that, and it's a wonderful place.
Do you have anything, any insights to add then, in closing?
Well, as far as fashion goes, do your own thing. Express yourself. Don't be afraid to wear something different. Do what you want to do. Next February, the 15th, there'll be an opening reception in St. Charles at the Fine Line Creative Arts Center of my wearable art that I've created through the 40 years that I've had Finn's Fabrics, and I hope you'll come and enjoy. And it's lovely to share my creativity with the world. It says in the Bible that you mustn't hide your light under a bushel. And so that's why I've been sharing my creativity and love of creating with all of you.